you can't really control your thoughts. However, there is a caveat that you can control your input. And your input is no doubt going to impact your thoughts, right? It's going to cue up your thoughts, right? It's going to cue up what you're thinking about. So if you want to make it easier on yourself, first step is, stop reading about donuts or stop surrounding yourself with all these temptations. That just is an environment that's just going to breed that kind of food noise.
Hey there, Adam. You know what I've been enjoying lately? I think, and by lately I mean in my middle age, is peace and quiet. How about you? Are you down with peace and quiet? Or are you like somebody who needs a lot of noise?
It's peace and quiet is nice, but it's tough. There are times where I challenge myself to go on car rides without any music or go on walks without any podcasts or anything like that. It's not easy. Wherever you go, there you are.
It is true. That is no truer statement, in fact. But yeah, so I bring this up because, something I think a lot of people struggle with, and I know I've struggled with it from time to time, is the constant noise food seems to create in our brains, right? Like, have you heard this term, food noise? I'm sure you have.
Absolutely. Food noise is very prevalent and something clients ask us about all the time. How do I reduce this food noise? And I hear you. I get it. We get it.
It is incessant. It's awful. It's like that mosquito that finds you in the middle of the night and gets in your ear. Just, you can't get rid of it. That's food noise to me. No, but
I've actually never had a mosquito annoying me in the middle of the night. That sounds terrible.
It is. Trust me, you don't want it to happen. If any of you out there have experienced that, send Adam an email. Just remind him he doesn't want to experience it. It is awful. Never mind, it wakes me up. Okay, so what is food noise? Food noise is a preoccupation and an incessant thoughts, thinking. Am I hungry? I feel hungry. Should I get a snack? What snack am I going to have? I think I want a snack. What's for dinner? What's for lunch tomorrow? Have I decided on breakfast? You might be in the middle of a meal thinking, what is my next meal going to be? When am I going to eat again? And it is nonstop and it is compulsive. We have no control over this. Did I miss anything, Adam? Did I get it all?
No, I think the way you describe that is excellent. It almost seems like if it were in a movie, it would get faster and faster and the music would start going faster as the thoughts start happening.
Yes. Yeah, it's a cloud. It's a cloud and it just rolls in and takes over and it's constant. And we get it, right? Like we get it. And clients do ask, how do I address this? How do I deal with this? So I thought today we could talk about that. And as always, I think number one most important thing to understand is it's changeable. It is not permanent. You are not broken. And this is something that can be addressed. So Adam, why don't you start by telling us in what ways does food noise serve us?
So food noise, like you said, is a habit, but it's also a distraction, right? It prevents us from thinking about other things. If we're not thinking about the food, what else are we going to think about? And for some people, that could be a terrifying thought. So understanding that every behavior we do, positive or negative, every habit we have is serving us in some way is really powerful because then you can say, all right, it is distracting me from some thoughts. That's the first step there.
Yeah. And you know what, let's clarify habit, right? Because I want to make sure we're clear, like nobody's choosing to have food noise. And that's a very definition of a habit. A habit, the brain has automated, put on autopilot, a certain thing to spare energy so you don't have to put any effort into it, right? That's a habit. So this food noise is a habit. It's automated. You're not choosing it. So yeah, we want to, if you have awareness that it's going on, great. Step one is accomplished, right?
Like always, there it is. Always the awareness. Yep.
Yes. And then step two, understanding how it serves. 100%, it's a great distraction. So so then we might want to go further into that and understand, okay, well, what is it distracting me from? So this is a really, really crucial component of starting to unravel food noise and releasing yourself from this habit. I'm going to give a couple of examples. Well,
Please.
just one really.
All
It's
right.
personal. um, so I, way back in the day, worked at a cupcake bakery in New York City,
That was when
frosting
cupcakes were,
cupcakes.
was that when they were all the rage and they were like on every corner?
Yes, I was in the window wearing my pastels for every passerby to see. Okay. So it was great. It was very iconic. I looked cute in my little, cupcake thing situation. I also started gaining a lot of weight and I developed food noise. Um, it was tricky. It was though I looked happy frosting my cupcakes, I was not. So here's what, looking back, I recognize had to happen for me to overcome this. Number one, I clearly was aware that this whole situation wasn't working for me. I was headed down a path where I was putting on weight and very unhappy with how I was feeling physically. But then I had to get real with myself. Well, it wasn't just that, right? There was something going on, and being surrounded by food and delicious baked goods all day long allowed me to find escape from my misery. And so then I developed food noise where I was just constantly thinking like, well, what could I have now? Well, what could I have next? Well, could I eat that crumb? Well, could I eat this? Well, they said I should taste this and this and this is all right. So I came to understand that food noise was distracting me from feelings I didn't want to have and things I didn't want to have to think about. And at the time I was super homesick. I was confused about my life. I was broke as anything, right? And so I took that awareness that this food noise was now living in my brain, and I said, well, what is it distracting me from? And I got real about what it was distracting me from. Have you had any experiences like this, Adam, or do you know of any clients that you've worked with who've had something like this going on?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the question I want to ask is, or, kind of like, so you mean to tell me that being in a bakery with, delicious cupcakes impacted your thoughts? Like, of course it did, right? And I think oftentimes, I'll talk with a client and they're like, I can't stop thinking about donuts. And then like we kind of dig further and it's like, it turns out they were reading about the best donuts in their area, or they can't stop thinking about a certain food and they're reading about it.
Mhm.
And I think our diet, or our nutrition, of course, it's about what we eat, but it's also about what we listen to, what we watch, who we listen to. And, you can't really control your thoughts. However, there is a caveat that you can control your input. And your input is no doubt going to impact your thoughts, right? It's going to cue up your
Mhm.
thoughts, right? It's going to cue up what you're thinking about. So if you want to make it easier on yourself, first step is, stop reading about donuts or stop surrounding yourself with all these temptations. That just is an environment that's just going to breed that kind of food noise.
Yeah, absolutely. And if anyone out there is living a stress-free, pain-free, and by pain I don't mean like actual physical horrible pain. I mean like discomfort-free life. Um, well, congratulations. But also like we are going to encounter stress and discomforts and, worries, preoccupations, and for sure feeling those things in an environment that also triggers us to think about food, that's kind of setting us up for developing food noise. So there's two pieces there, right? It's like understanding what what you might want to be distracting yourself from, recognizing that, right? Like if you experience food noise, the point is notice where it's loudest in your day. What is going on at that point? A, it might be a stressor, or or B, you could be in an environment that is triggering it, right? Like maybe it's the break room at 3 p.m. where you have the rest of your work to get done, looming, right? This is like a perfect storm for that food noise. Um, so yeah, and then the intake piece, right? Like our inputs definitely impact what we're going to think about. So, all right, so let's talk about how we work to eliminate food noise. So, one thing that I did, Adam, when I was working in the bakery and I recognized this was happening, I knew like I couldn't quit my job, right? I needed a paycheck. So I actually asked to change jobs and I left frosting in the window behind and I moved down to the basement, to the dark, damp basement where I could take phone orders. And so I was in front of a computer talking on the phone all day long instead of face to face with every delicious treat imaginable. And it helped. It helped significantly. And I had to kind of go out on a limb to achieve that, right? Like I had to go to my boss and say, look, I need a different job. And I'd like for it to be in this situation. And it made things so much easier. Now I still had to pass through the bakery to get to the basement, but I felt much stronger for it because I knew where I was going. I wasn't going to be faced with all of that. So what do you think
I like that
about?
a lot. I mean, as we're talking about this more, it kind of feels like this food noise is almost a canary in the coal mine, so to speak, of like emotional eating. Like this is kind of the precursor of emotional eating. You're having these thoughts. They're typically happening when you're stressed, you're anxious, or you're frustrated, you're lonely. There's all sort. You have some sort of uncomfortable feeling, right? That's
Mhm.
really what it comes down to. And the food noise comes in to help us distract ourselves from that. And again, in that moment, it's serving us, but recognizing that it is an uncomfortable feeling that is probably driving the food noise.
hmm Yeah. And so what I ended up having to do was say, because guess what? Even though I had changed my jobs and I had, had work to do, I was busy. Now I have the feelings to deal with because I'm
Right.
not covering them up and the food noise too. So I then had to start figuring out how I was going to deal with those feelings and figure out a way to kind of replicate what food noise was giving me. To be clear, food noise kind of gives us hits of dopamine constantly, right? And if that's on automation, whew, all day long, we're getting little bits of joy, little bits
Yep.
of chemical joy. So one thing that I wrote in my notes actually is like we have to kind of have some chemical warfare here. And I had to figure out a different way to get some feel good chemicals in my brain. And so another thing that I did was I made myself get up every morning and go exercise before I
Love
went into
that.
work. It was rough. And I know you guys out there listening, I know these feelings. Um, it was just you wake up in the morning, you're like, I don't know how I'm going to get through this day, but forcing myself out the door to go and move my body and give myself the opportunity to create the chemicals in my brain very consciously and intentionally was the best warfare on food noise ever, ever. And it totally helped my day.
That's fantastic. That's great. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
You have to have that chemical warfare because I mean, you're denying your brain something it's gotten hooked on, frankly.
Right. But the interesting thing is, it's not real. Well, it is real, but like, what's? Let's talk about the challenge that we came up with. Like, so like, let's say you're having food
Mm.
noise about a certain food.
Mhm.
Do you want to
Mhm.
tell us more about
Yeah.
that?
Okay, so here's the idea is that our brains make a lot more of things than they actually are, right? True or not true,
No doubt.
right?
My favorite quote in my life, drum roll please, and my
I'm
mom
ready.
always told me this, is the monster is never as scary as it seems. I use that like when I was a little kid, I was nervous about elementary school. Then I was nervous about middle school, then high school, then college. Like, and it was always like the monster is never as scary as it seems. And you know, that's like things are just never as bad as we think. And you know, I just think that applies to every aspect of life.
Mm,
But on the flip side, sometimes the anticipation of something is greater than the actual event itself, in and of itself.
yes. The cookie is not as sweet as it seems.
Well, it's so
So,
poetic.
oh, yes, well, write that one down. Send it to the printer. So here's the challenge. The challenge is, all right, so we recognize we're aware we have food noise. We're starting to try and figure out when is it loudest during the day and why. What is going on that this food noise seems to be cranked up at volume 10? Okay. Now, next step, and this is the test. Is there something particular, like your client with the donuts? Okay. I mean, they probably saw this picture of some crazy bacon maple situation. I remember when I was on Facebook, they used to send Facebook messages out when I lived in New York City about like, oh, the donut truck is down on
Yep.
whatever, 14th Street, Union Square. Limited time maple bacon donut.
Right.
No, you must abandon your desk and go now. All right. So this is all right. These are the inputs, and our brain is going, yes, maple bacon donut, so delicious. All right. So you've got maple bacon donut in your mind. And now I want you to visualize tasting the maple bacon donut. What does it taste like? All right. Feel it viscerally, feel it in your chest, feel your mouth kind of warm to the sugars, right? Like, oh man, I'm starting to salivate. I actually am salivating. This is the power of the mind, y'all. Okay. So now you got to find a place to actually go get a maple bacon donut, because the second half of this test is actually eat the donut and realize, like, yeah, it's probably good. You don't need more than a bite or two of that sucker, and you've had plenty. And you have to be super present and aware. So whatever food the food noise is about, I guarantee your brain has made a huge story out of the experience of that food, and in reality is not all it's cracked up to be,
Yep. So
right?
absolutely. Often we're after the experience of eating something, not the food itself. We think we want the donut. We think we want the chips. We think we want the ice cream. It's the experience of eating it. But
Hmm.
time after time, I hear from clients who learn and practice to become more present, right? I always encourage them to pretend they're a food critic, right? Taste the texture, the smell, everything. Like really be present. When you're actually tasting a food that you think you want, often more often than not, the food is not as good as it seems, especially when it
Yeah.
comes to our childhood favorites. Like usually they've changed the recipe, or even if they haven't, it just doesn't taste as good as we think it does, right? The anticipation in this case is greater than the actual event itself. So when you
Yeah.
challenge yourself to really taste it and really eat it slowly, sips of water between bites, forks and knives down between bites, if you're eating something that requires that, whatever it is, because it's funny because often we daydream about our favorite foods, and then when we actually eat it, we're just shoveling it into our mouths. So in this case, you don't need a fork and knife for a donut, whatever it is. If you're eating a donut, try to eat it slowly though, and really pay attention to how you're feeling, the texture, everything. And when you do that, again, it's really usually not what we think it is. It doesn't taste as good as we think it does.
No, for sure, because there's not all the story attached to that experience in
Bingo.
actuality. I think the childhood favorite is a perfect example of that. I
Right.
mean, if you think of a childhood favorite food, it's probably attached to one, if not more, people in your life who may or may not be around anymore. It's definitely attached to a time that no longer exists. It's a fairy tale. It was wonderful, but it's a fairy tale. It doesn't exist anymore. There is no way you can recapture that taste from way back when. It ain't going to happen because
Right.
there's way more attached to it than what exists now.
Right. And this is a fascinating challenge because we're challenging you to actually eat the food you think you want. Now, there
Yeah.
has to be a fine line though, because obviously if you have that food noise, you can't do that all day long. But the idea is to understand that the food is really never going to make us feel the way we want to feel, right? If
No.
anything, it makes us not feel and or it fills a void, right? And I think if you really dial it down, if you really drill it down, you know, I think food is certainly pleasurable, no doubt. But I think for some people, food just makes them not feel, right? It's just a
Mm,
momentary break of, I don't have to deal with this, I don't have to deal with that. Just our brain quiets for a little bit. And part of that might be that your food noise is like that's quieting down and you don't have to deal with that back and forth chatter. But if you really think
yes.
about it, sometimes it's just the relief you get, not necessarily the pleasure.
Right. I think a great example too, and of noise, of mental noise, and I think I told you this one, Adam, because I want to make sure too we understand it's not really the food, right? It's the thoughts that we're hooked on. Um, if any of you listening, and I'm sure you have been in like a relationship that you had to end yourself, maybe you didn't want to for whatever reason, but you just knew it was going to be better for you. And I'm sure you can remember, like for days, for weeks, for months, that person was still like noise in your brain. You wake up, you're thinking about them. You brush your teeth, you're waking about them. You're getting in the car, thinking about them. Like it's noise in your brain. And you just think like, I'm never going to get away from this. Oh, I should call them. Oh, I should text them. Oh, I should email them. I wonder what they're doing. Constant, constant, constant. There comes a day you stop.
Right.
Do any of us ever recognize that? No. But what do? We find other outlets of happiness. We find other outlets of moving forward, right? I mean, you can't totally do that with food because you got to eat food. But the point is, like, there is an end. You can create an end to it. It is not forever.
Right.
Right. And it is actually just being hooked on thoughts. So I don't know. I think that correlation is tangible for most of us, because I think most of us have been in that position where it's like, oh my God, I'm never going to get this human being out of my head. And yet you do.
Right. So two things. Yes, totally. So two things. In your case, you introduced, exercise in the morning, right? So you just introduced something completely different. It wasn't food related. That gave you some joy, that gave you some pleasure, right? And I think it's the old, tell someone to not think about a white polar bear, and all they think about is the white polar bear, right? We become fixated. Our brain just goes in this endless loop of trying to focus or get what we say we can't, that resisting, right? The best way to short circuit or shortcut it is to what I call DNI, distract yourself ideally and immerse yourself in something else, right? So if in this case, if a person, instead of trying not to think about that person, immerse and distract yourself and immerse yourself in something else, right? Whether it's a hobby, yourself, like a different person, whatever it might be, right? But you want to do that instead of just trying not to not do something.
Right.
It's far more effective to distract and immerse yourself in something.
So yes, and I want to make sure we come in with this last piece, because I think it's crucial to have a plan. Okay, like you can't just say, "Yeah, I have food noise, and I'll deal with it when it comes up," or "Yeah, I'll try that." No, you actually have to have a plan. So there's two pieces of this, especially if it's food noise that we're talking about, and it is. A food plan really pulls the plug on, am I hungry when it comes up, right? Like if you have meal decisions made, and I would encourage you, and I know it's not always possible, but I would encourage you to not only plan what you're going to eat, but when you're going to eat it. And this does not have to be forever. Remember that. Like, we're really trying to address food noise. We're trying to overcome it, eliminate it, let it go.
A quick thing, like, because I know sometimes, people roll their eyes at meal planning and setting, I can't plan the whole week. One of the easiest things you can do is you wake up, decide what you're going to eat for breakfast. Right after breakfast, take a minute. Here's what we're going to eat for lunch. Right after lunch, here's what I'm going to eat for my snack. After your snack, here's what's for dinner. If you don't want to plan too far in advance. But by doing that, you're kind of setting it and forgetting it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, whatever pace you want to do the planning, but plan, right? Because here's the other thing that happens when you don't. You're mentally exhausting yourself. We've talked about willpower before. Well, guess what? To exhaust willpower, just let food noise run rampant and make no plans.
Exactly.
If that's what you want to do. So let's not do that, right? Let's make a plan, whether you do it at each meal or at a day at a time, a week at a time, whatever works best for you. But this is like the number one way to address that question, what am I going to eat next? Well, you have your plan. You already spent the energy. So this thought I can start letting go of, because I've already made this plan. I've already spent that energy. Why am I going to do this to myself? Okay. So that's one piece of the planning that's really important. The other important piece is, if you're going to do what Adam said, distract and immerse. When those thoughts come up, you have to know how you're going to distract yourself and what you're immersing yourself in. You cannot wait to make that decision when food noise is at its loudest, because you will lose. You will lose. So the second you recognize food noise is up, you have your DNI plan and you go for it, right?
Yes. I love that you're using my acronym. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Yes. And what we're referring to is known as an implementation intention, right? So when X happens, when the food noise happens, here's what I'm going to do, right? So it could
Mhm.
be when the food noise is at its loudest, let's say it's the middle of the afternoon, I'm going to watch a funny clip on YouTube, or I'm going to go for a 5 minute walk, or I'm going to text a few friends, or I'm going to call someone, right? Like those are implementation tensions. And the key is you're deciding before you're in the moment. Because when you're in the moment, all hell breaks loose, right? We're very short term, irrational minded. We're not thinking clearly, right? This is known as the
Mhm.
hot cold empathy gap. You can wake up feeling rare to go, rare, did I say rare? Feeling raring to go, right?
You
You're,
had it.
you're, you're ready to take on the day. And then 2 hours later, 3 hours later, you're like, let's get pizza for lunch, even though you didn't plan to get pizza for lunch, right? You're very in different states. So you want to take it when you're in the most focused, rational state and plan ahead so that when you're in that hot state, that most vulnerable state, that you have a plan. It's kind of like having, a toolkit at your ready.
Yes. And I would encourage whatever you plan to do be something that provides some chemical warfare. So things you mentioned, Adam, were great, right? The walk, watching something funny, connecting with people, all those things provide feel good chemicals in the brain. And that's what we have to have going on to start to eliminate the need for that habit of food noise.
Right.
So it can't just be like, oh, I'll do work. No, you won't.
Right.
Trust me, you won't, because that's probably why you have food noise. So,
Yeah.
so yeah, give yourself the opportunity to do something that feels good. And
Right.
then slowly the food noise will dissipate. You are not at the mercy of food noise. No, no, no. We can change this. Brains are plastic. I'm convinced. I've done it.
No doubt. And we've helped thousands of people do that. There's no question about it. And,
Yeah.
one of my favorite kind of ways to give advice sometimes is in the form of questions, right? And questions are very
Mm.
powerful. And you can also ask yourself when you're having that food noise, like, what do I really want, or what's really bothering me? Because again, the food noise is serving us in that moment. So what it is that you really want, or what is it really bothering you? And there is a scenario, which is definitely a little more advanced, is when you figure out what it is and you go after it, right? It could be that you're just very overwhelmed with work and you just need an escape. And perhaps you can write a to-do list and say, all right, these are the 3 things I'm going to accomplish today or tomorrow. But tackling the discomfort, right? And tackling what is actually causing you to feel overwhelmed. Because
Yes.
ultimately emotional eating is, we don't want to deal with reality in the moment, right? We want to just escape.
Yes. Yeah. It's funny you're talking about like what is it you really want? I've actually noticed I've got a little bit of food noise from time to time in the afternoons. Every once in a while, I'm not a big napper, right? Generally, I have pretty steady energy throughout the afternoon all the way till it's time for bed. And yes, I go to bed ridiculously early. Um, but I have noticed I start to have food noise in the afternoons on days I actually need a nap. I need to just go to my bed, lay down, and let myself nap. And I've witnessed this with clients as well. They will fight. They will fight feeling tired and having a dip in energy and food noise. All of a sudden, they find themselves like, oh, maybe I should have a snack. Should I have a snack? What would I have a snack? Maybe I need a snack. Was it close to dinner? Maybe I just have dinner. I mean, it is crazy making. And if you'll just stop and recognize, like, I'm having food noise, what is it that I really need right now?
Yep.
What do I really want? Because it is not making decisions about food. I guarantee.
Yep. Yep. So many examples of clients where they say, you know what, I really listened to myself. I was really tired. I allowed myself to take a 15-minute nap. I came downstairs, or I sat in my car, and I didn't have cravings anymore, right? The food noise was gone. So they gave themselves what they actually wanted and needed, not what they thought they needed.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, anything else we need to say about this?
I think we covered it all. I think this is, a very a topic that a lot of people deal with, and I think that if you implement the things we talked about, then you will be successful, no question about it. And it takes time. It takes practice, right? Remember, practice is uncomfortable. There's times you're going to succeed. There's times you're going to fail. There's times where you feel like I got this, and then there's times you feel like a newbie, a total beginner, right? But if you do that long
Yes.
enough, it becomes routine. And if you do the routine long enough, then it becomes habitual. You can create positive habits too. So,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah. You created that habit. Why can't you create a different one?
right.
So,
You hear this
all
for one
right,
sec?
guys. Oh, do what?
That was silence. There's the food noise. It's gone.
Ah. Got me.
I wake up early to come up with these things, Haley.
I love it. You totally got me on that one. It was good.
All right,
All right,
guys.
guys. Go
We
ahead, Adam.
will talk to you next week. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I always love hearing from you. And until next time, we'll talk to you soon.
Take good care.